this is Professor Poyo, and this is our chapter on poetry. Poetry is a very special place in children's education, and we need poetry to help children celebrate what's clear, precise, beautiful, artful, and true in our language. Here's our learning outline. We're going to talk about what is poetry. We'll look at the historical perspective, the elements of poetry, the types and forms of poetry, and then look specifically at using poetry in the classroom. It's challenging to think of a definition for poetry that some poem or other won't evade. Still, we know poetry when we see it. It's a way of communicating and expressing ideas with intentional word choice to achieve a sonorous and rhythmical effect. Poetry is a precise form of language with intense feeling, imagery, and qualities of sound that bounce pleasingly off the tongue, tickle the ear, and leave the mind something to ponder. It has its origins in oral tradition. Is it no wonder they're often read aloud or put to music? This is one of my favorite poems by Shel Silverstein, Hug-a-War. I will not play at tug-a-war. I'd rather play at hug-a-war, where everyone hugs instead of tugs, where everyone giggles and rolls on the rug, where everyone kisses and everyone grins and everyone cuddles and everyone wins. Here's another poem. This is actually a book that has just one poem in it, and they put it to video. So let's listen and pay careful attention to the musicality and the rhythm of the poem. And I want you to ask yourself, what emotion or feeling does the poem evoke to you personally?
I'll Follow the Moon, written by Stephanie Lisa Terra, illustrated by Lee Edward Fody. Warm, soft, dry. I dream in blue, shimmering yellow, and turquoise too. I'm coming, Mama. I'll see you soon. I know just how. I'll follow the moon. Whoosh, night, kiss. I breathe in deep, salt air on my face. Turtle heart, leap. I'm coming, Mama. I'll see you soon. I know just how. I'll follow the moon. Eyes like mine, of deepest blue, shell to shell we go, in love anew. I'm here, Mama, here with you. I knew I'd find you. Moon did too.
Hopefully that poem was able to evoke some sort of emotion or feeling for you. Poetry began centuries ago in the form of nursery rhymes. Nursery rhymes are verses by anonymous poets that are highly rhythmic, tightly rhymed, and popular with small children. Although nursery rhymes have been recited to and by children since medieval times, they were associated with Mother Goose when the publisher, John Newbery, borrowed the name from a different publication. Now here we see one, Mary, Mary, quite contrary, How Does Your Garden Grow? With silver bells and cockle shells and pretty maids all in a row. Or how about Hickory Dickory Dock? Hickory Dickory Dock, the mouse ran up the, that's right, clock. And I bet you know the rest of it as well. That's the wonderful thing about these types of poems, the nursery rhymes, is that they do stick with you for years and years. The associations in many of our nursery rhymes, though, can be traced back to actual events that occurred centuries ago. For instance, I don't know if you knew this or not, but Ring Around the Rosie actually refers to the Black Death or the bubonic plague, which killed 1/4 of the population of England back in the 14th century. The ring around the roses was the telltale rash of an infected person, and the pocketful of posies was for protection against bad airs that were believed to spread the sickness. And the ashes and the falling down refer to the people who were stricken and died with dramatic suddenness, and then whose bodies were burned. You may be able to think of other nursery rhymes as well that have a tradition in an actual event, an historical event. Next, we're going to look at elements of poetry. And when we talk about elements of poetry, what we really mean is the sound of the poem. Ask yourself what you like about your favorite poem. And if you can't quite put your finger on it, consider the main features that critics agree make up a good poem: sounds, images, and forms. Most poetry for children is crafted with a very keen ear. That's why it usually is best to read it out loud. Sounds are the musical aspect of poetry. Rhythm, rhyme, alliteration, and onomatopoeia choreograph much of the listener's emotional experience. Helping our students hear the elements of poetry can be quite fun, especially when we allow them to use their critical thinking, collaboration, and creativity to communicate their new knowledge. Let's watch.
This is a rhyming rap about alliteration. Let's find friends at alliteration station. Amy Ape is angry. Billy Bat is bold. Henry the Hippo is hungry. Ken Coyote is cold. This is a rhyming rap about alliteration. Let's find friends at alliteration station. Patty Penguin plays. Sammy Snake snoozes. Tony tells the team that Charlie Cheetah chooses. This is a rhyming rap about alliteration. Let's find friends at alliteration station. Now you've met my best buds. We sang a silly song. It's time to take a break. So sad to say so long. Silly song.
Alliteration!
Rhyming rap.
Alliteration!
Cool kids.
Alliteration!
That's a wrap. Everybody freeze.
Most likely, those students will never forget what alliteration means. Or sometimes we can ask old friends to help teach us new words.
Tigger, what on earth are you doing here? Well,
Rabbit, when
what?
Rue's really upset about what happened today.
Oh, I see. Rue's upset. Well, what about me? Look at all this mess you've caused on spring cleaning day, no less.
I'm not talking about spring and cleaning day. I'm talking about
Don't say it, Tigger, don't say it. Do not say that word in my house.
What word?
I refuse to say it.
Well, if you won't tell me what word I'm not supposed to say, then how am I gonna know not to say it? Let's see, is it, carrot says?
No,
Rutabagas.
no.
Think about what you're making the cheeks.
That's not even a word.
Onomatopoeia? And that is a word.
Why would you ever say that?
Why wouldn't you say it? Onomatopoeia, onomatopoeia. All I want to be is an onomatopoeia.
Easter. The word is Easter.
That was gonna be my next guess.
Yep, that's a little silly, but I'm sure that Tigger and Roo and all of the Winnie the Pooh characters fit right in with our theme here of Children's Lit. Some other literary devices I have listed here. Poets often use the sounds within words themselves to create sound patterns. Edgar Allan Poe used assonance in his poem, The Bells. Listen. Hear the mellow wedding bell. In Alfred Lord Tennyson's poem, The Eagle, consonance is the preferred element. He clasps the crag with crooked hands. What do you hear in these examples? Is it enough to help you come up with your own definition for these words? Rewind and listen again. Types of figurative language are listed here as well. These are typically used for comparing or contrasting. Song artists use them as well because they're very powerful. Let's listen.
You change your mind like a girl changes clothes. I know you care. Shout whenever, and I'll be there. You want my love, you want my heart. You are still here. Said I'm so sick of love songs, so sad and slow. The song is set for you, and the shadow of the day will embrace the world in gray.
So now that you've heard some of the literary devices in songs, I want you to think about the songs that you hear. Think about songs you may be listening to today. See if you can find examples of those artists using these literary devices. The next category we're going to look at is types of poetry books. Themed poetry collections make it easier to find poems related to topics in the curriculum. Integration of science and social studies curriculum with language arts instruction is being undertaken in schools all across the country. There are websites listed in Blackboard with specialized poems for content areas. Be sure to take a look at these, and our textbook also lists these types of poetry books. The Mother Goose and Nursery Rhyme books, nursery songs, anthologies, specialized poetry books, and single illustrated poems. Okay, we're going to look at each one of these individually. So let's start with our Mother Goose and Nursery Rhyme books, as well as our nursery songs. For well over a century, many of the greatest illustrators of children's books have published editions of these familiar rhymes. As such, both Mother Goose and nursery songbooks are heavily illustrated. Cultures all over the world have their equivalents to these popular rhymes. Nursery songbooks include the musical notations as well. There are countless references in both literature and everyday conversation to the poems found in nursery rhyme collections, making these resources a necessity in the life of a child. Anthologies are also compilations of many poems, but should be organized by subject for ease of use, especially when you're looking for an appropriate text for the curriculum. Consider the websites that I listed on Blackboard. Suppose you have a lesson or a unit on geology, okay? There are poems that are already created that have to do with that content area. So why not choose one of these poems and use it as, say, an anticipatory set to get your students interested, and then perhaps continue with that poem throughout your unit. Now, specialized poetry books are collections of a single author or a single topic, or even a particular age group or one poetic form. For instance, jazz. That specialized poetry book has poems that are all around a single topic, which would be jazz music. Now, single illustrated poems may be found in book form, like the turtle poem, I'll Follow the Moon, or even the narrative poem, 'Twas the Night Before Christmas. Types and forms of poetry also include lyric poetry and narrative poetry. Today's lyric or expressive poems are works of emotion, observation, or insight, like this poem here, My Day. I have lots of fun playing in the sun. I love to run and laugh and play. I can smile and laugh all day. I love to rhyme and have a good time, so now I end. I'll see you again. This category is huge and includes just about any poem that's not a narrative poem, not a nonsense poem, or doesn't follow some recognized form like a haiku, and is likely to be a lyric poem if it conveys the poet's thoughts or observations on a topic, like this one. Narrative poetry, on the other hand, tells a story, as it suggests by its name, like 'Twas the Night Before Christmas. It has a whole story of what happened when Santa Claus came. Poetry can also be categorized by its poetic form or the way it's structured. Among the many forms, there are a few we'll highlight here. Limericks are one stanza, 5-line verse form. Ballads are fairly long narrative poems that are sometimes composed around music and often have a heroic theme. Haikus have a very strict form, 3 lines of free verse composed of just 17 syllables, arranged as 5-7-5, or 5 syllables in the first line, 7 syllables in the second, and 5 syllables in the third line. Poetry evolved over the centuries, but the 20th century saw a change in poetry form. One of these noticeable changes was freedom from the formality as non-rhyming poems became more common. So as its name suggests, free verse has no rhyme or particular rhythm, but makes its impression with an intensity of insight or feeling. Now, when letters and words are arranged on the page so that they physically resemble the subject, then we have a concrete poem, like this one about shoes. Popularity of poetry in the classroom began in the 1980s and continues to this present day. Poems may be used to achieve very many different goals and objectives. For instance, poems are extremely useful and effective for oral reading fluency practice because of their rhythm and their patterns. My Title I students that I taught in Raleigh, North Carolina, used to keep a poem folder with all of the poems that we had practiced together. These folders would go home with them every night, and they would practice reading their favorite poem to either mom, dad, siblings, even stuffed animals. These students here in the picture are using iPads to take pictures of individual compositions, and they're compiling their own digital poetry anthology. The authors of our textbook also have ideas for how to use poetry in your classroom. As you read through them, think about how they would work in your classroom. Are there any additional suggestions that you would make? Ultimately, you're the one who decides which poems to use in your classroom, so it might be nice to have a little bit of a criteria for selecting poetry for children. So we may include these 6 characteristics. Honesty. Poems should avoid sentimentality or talking down to the child. A positive spirit. There's many poems that appeal mainly to children's mischievous side, but the better ones feature creative wordplay or illuminating observations, or both. Sounds. Sounds should support the sense of the poem. Any rhymes should be precise and fresh, not so predictable. Alliteration can be used, but used carefully. Images. Language should bring clear images to mind's eye. Insight. Good poems should surprise readers by pointing out things readers didn't realize or had overlooked. And finally, relevance. While not essential, poems can be chosen that are relevant to what's happening in the world, among the students, in the curriculum, or relevant to the interests of the students. All of these are excellent criteria for incorporating and selecting poetry in your classroom. This is a great chapter. Think through, and I want you especially to look at the ideas that the authors give you. There is a check for understanding in the PowerPoint, and I want you specifically to be thinking about how you could help your students be excited about poetry. Oftentimes we see that children are not very excited. Actually, oftentimes they'll say they hate poems, they hate poetry. It could be for lots of different reasons. It could be that they're not relevant, that they don't pertain to the students' interests. It could be that none of them are poems that the students are able to select themselves. It could be that they don't understand the poem or they're not engaged in the poem. But I want you to think about what you would do in your classroom and how you would help your students to have a positive attitude towards poetry. And in the meantime, if you have any questions whatsoever, please make sure that you ask, let me know, and we'll stay engaged in our discussion board. Have a wonderful day. God bless you.